Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, well, so in today's episode, I thought I'd try to say something about Albert Camus' 1942 novel, The Stranger. And in particular, I want to try to say something about the second half of the story, namely the main character, Meursault's trial, and the famous ending where he finds himself in prison awaiting to be executed. Okay, so before I get into the details here, maybe I should first try to give a very brief synopsis of the story for those of you who might not know. Okay, so here goes. So The Stranger is about a shipping clerk named Meursault living in French Algiers, who's a young, ordinary man, but who's also someone who's very detached. So the story begins with Meursault receiving a telegram informing him of his mother's death. He goes on to attend the funeral, but he surprises the other attendees with his unusual indifference when he's there. Most notably, he never seems to cry. Later in the story, Meursault and his friend are confronted by two Arabs on a beach. Now, violence ensues, with Meursault eventually killing one of them. Now, it was a hot day, and aside from the weather, there seems to be no explanation for Meursault's criminal act. Later, at his murder trial, the court seems much more interested in Meursault's lack of grief over his mother's death than they do over the monstrosity of his crime. Judged to be cold-hearted and non-conforming, the court sentences Meursault with the punishment of death. Awaiting his execution in prison, Meursault initially struggles to come to terms with his impending death. But one day, after becoming enraged with a priest who wants to try to save him, Meursault denounces religion and refuses to appeal to it as a way of finding consolation and meaning. Okay, so that's a quick description of the story. But now let me jump right in and go right to the trial. Okay, so like I said, Meursault has been charged with murder. And in the courtroom, though, he doesn't defend himself. Now, here's the thing. The members of the court, they all think they know why Meursault committed the crime, and they think that they know who he really is. That's to say, everybody acts as if they know why things happen to people and why people do what they do. But in reality, nobody does. Now, if Meursault knows anything at all, it's exactly this, that he had no motive, and that's why he doesn't try to defend himself. What he knows is only that his life has turned out the way it has, and that one life is as good as any other. He knows that any explanation here is just going to be meaningless fiction or a form of consolation. And this is the ironic thing. In a courtroom that condemns him on the basis of his empirical behavior, in some deeper sense, he's the only truthful person here. He's the only one who sees things for what they really are. And again, this is because his prosecutors are unable to accept accident and chance, defaulting instead to the universal human preference for meaningful or logical interpretation. Now, this is, to a degree, understandable, right? I mean, from the point of view of the social and the moral, it doesn't seem satisfactory to let chance or contingency stand as the complete explanation for things. I mean, if this was the explanation for everything, how on earth could we make sense of anything? How could we hold others responsible? How could we find motive and lay blame, which we so often want to do? But it's interesting. Leonardo da Vinci noticed that if you look long enough at a wall covered with rocks and dirt, you'll eventually start to see in it all sorts of recognizable shapes and forms, from landscapes to faces. Now, today we refer to this as the phenomenon of pareidolia. And it's the process of perceiving an image in random stimuli or noise. Like famously, of course, seeing a face in the craters of the moon. Now, why is this sort of phenomenon significant? Well, there's obviously an evolutionary reason. I mean, given that we're a social species, those ancestors of ours who were better able to distinguish friend from enemy or figure out the emotions in a face were probably more likely to survive, right? But more importantly for our purposes, what pareidolia seems to reveal is the fact that we are beings that impose patterns onto randomness. We need to read meaning and intelligibility into a world that doesn't seem to always have it. Well, this is what the court is to some extent doing with Meursault. And I don't think he wants to have any of this. And that's because he understands that the face is just an eroded pile of rocks. To recognize it in any other way is a delusion. Actually, this is also why Meursault reacts so violently at the end of the novel against the somewhat dogmatic and patronizing priest who comes to console him in prison and try to save him. And that's because for Meursault, consolation would mean substituting something else, again, meaningless fiction, for the bare absolute truth. As he says about the priest, he says, "It might look as if my hands were empty, but actually I was sure of myself, far surer than he was, sure of my own life and of the death that was coming." So Meursault, he spurns the fictions of hope and instead embraces life in a world limited by the finality of death, by the guillotine none of us can avoid. For him, there is no hope. No, because he's truthful, because he wants to live authentically, he comes to understand that hope is precisely what he must sacrifice. And that's because hope deludes one into seeking the promise of some illusionary future. And so it takes away from the present life, the only thing anyone can be absolutely certain of, and so the most precious thing there is. Hope, in other words, minimizes the value of this life as preparation for a vague and uncertain life outside of it. It's interesting. As many know, when the mythical Pandora let all the evils out of her box into the world, she kept hope inside of it. Now, many have interpreted this to mean that she left hope as a source of comfort for us. That hope is, that it's a gift to humanity. But I don't think Camus would agree. No, for him, hope is more like a bane on our existence. It's the cruelest form of torture because it keeps us hanging on to something despite clear evidence to the contrary. In this way, it's a form of resignation. No, better to be honest and let it go and revert our attention and energy back to those truths our hands can touch, leaving us free to live in the certainties of the here and now. Actually, this is why Meursault thinks about his mother at the very end of the novel and is so happy that she decided to get into a relationship at the end of her life. He sees in her newly found attitude a living for the present, free from any future concerns or expectations, or how it is she might be perceived by others. And who said that Meursault was indifferent to his mother? Anyway, so for Meursault, obviously, death is no gateway to another life. Rather, it's a closed door. No, life itself is its own meaning. But this isn't something that one can really understand until one has accepted one's death, which Meursault finally has. But you know who hasn't? The priest. The priest, ironically, is a corpse, Meursault says. Now, why is this? Well, it's because he doesn't accept death. It's because he, like the other members of the court earlier, it's because he defaults to assuaging the universal human desire for the readiest and most consoling solutions. Well, Meursault is not interested in anything like this. No, he's going readily to the guillotine to die unreconciled. Bye for now.